we're in the midst of a huge transformation where peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I am the Senior Partnerships Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I'm very excited to welcome our next guest onto the interview series, Kathleen Ragelis. She is the Senior Director of People at Komodo Health. Kathleen, thank you for being here. If you want to share a little bit about yourself for our listeners, including your pronouns, and when you were younger, do you remember how exactly you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Hey, Christina, thank you for having me on. Excited to be here. A little bit about me. I head up the people team at Komodo Health. We are a health tech software company. I'm based in Brooklyn, New York. We have offices in San Francisco, New York, as well as across the US and ex-US as well. Let's see, what did I want to be when I grow up? Fun question. When I was young, my first answer to that question was a bartender. I'm not sure that I knew what that was. And later I adjusted my dreams to wanting to be a pilot.
I love that answer. I think it's always interesting to think about where do we think we would be 10, 20 years down the line. Also love that you're hailing from Brooklyn, same borough as me as well. Fast forward to today as Senior Director of People, I'm sure you're thinking about company culture on a day-to-day basis, and that it's such a dynamic process, especially as folks are joining the organization and leaving as well. What are qualitative and quantitative ways you think about measuring company culture?
Yeah, I really love to see how much this topic of culture is kind of started to show up in various conversations. I think for us, we measure both, right? We measure quantitative and things like engagement surveys. Those are our primary measures of how we're doing on a culture basis. Qualitatively, we measure that by conversations with employees, conversations with managers. We get qualitative feedback as well in our engagement surveys. Probably close to over 1,000 line items now that myself and our team read through every single one. Still read through every single one. Takes me a little bit longer now than it used to. But we get a lot of really, really good feedback about what makes Komodo a special place to work and what we could and should be thinking about in the future. Beyond that, we hear feedback from candidates about their interview experience and what resonated with them. We hear feedback about our company and our culture through customers and what their interactions are with our teams. We hear feedback and online and Glassdoor reviews and things like that we kind of keep a pulse on of how are we doing what we think we're doing, and are we building the company that we aspire to be building that helps people, gives them an opportunity to really do their best work, to show up, to be themselves, to bring their passion and their innovation into, we're a very mission-driven company. And that's a big part of our culture as well.
Absolutely. And being a mission-driven company, I'm sure a lot of folks are interested in becoming part of the team and working towards that vision as well. And as you continue to grow, people have different kind of career goals or different places in their lives inside and outside of work. How are you thinking about intentionally growing and scaling your company culture while also maintaining that personalization in the entire employee experience from day one to year 5? And so forth?
It's a great question. For a bit of context in this, I joined Komodo about 2.5 years ago. We were a little over 200 employees at the time, and we are almost 900 now. So we've had astronomical growth in a pretty short period of time. That has come not only from hiring, but in completing 2 acquisitions as well. And so we've had kind of going through internal culture, how do you scale culture as the team naturally grows, as well as how do you welcome new folks into an environment that are coming from a different company, that are coming from a different culture. There are a handful of things that we've been thinking about over the years when it comes to scale. One of them was that, like every other company, how do you handle this transition to flexible work or hybrid work? Komodo pre-COVID was almost 100% in office. We had 2 headquarters and everybody was in San Francisco or New York. And now the majority of our employees are actually not in those hubs. have a lot of remote employees. We have folks who flex. Myself, I flex. I'm in my home in Brooklyn today, but our offices are in Manhattan. And being able to provide people opportunities to the part of your question about how your priorities shift depending on what stage of life you're in and what is priority for you at the time. I think for us, it's really been about maintaining optionality for our dragons, for our employees. We call ourselves dragons, but maintaining optionality for our dragons and giving folks the opportunity to, hey, we had a chess tournament this week. Are you interested in playing chess? Are you interested in in-person meetups? Are you interested in coming into the office and having lunch or having happy hours? Are you interested in spending time learning from other managers and kind of working through like workshopping stuff together? So really just thinking about what are the different ways that we can help culture appear for folks and kind of help enable that and meet them where they're at versus saying, this is our culture. This is how, we do ping pong on Fridays at 2, and this is what you'll find in the fridge, to, hey, you have an entire spread of ways that you can participate, ways that you can engage, ways that you can find your people. And my job is to give you that optionality and then check in with you to see how it's working and what is really resonating. And staying flexible. Like, we're all just kind of figuring this out,
Yeah, we're definitely figuring it out, asking those open-ended questions, not assuming what people need and want, but really having that collaborative conversation, testing things, iterating, and to your point, making sure we're meeting people where we are as well. So everybody has the best experience and is empowered to do their best work. We've also seen a shift in kind of the reflection of the role of work in people's lives overall as well. What do people want to spend 40 plus hours of their week doing? I think the stat is we spend at least a third of our lives working, including sleep too. How have you thought about and innovated your retention strategy for your dragons, if you have any specific examples?
Yeah, I think retention at Komodo has changed as our company has grown as well. My personal philosophy is that people want to do meaningful, exciting, good work. Give them the opportunity to do something that matters and something that kind of like jazzes them up. They're going to want to do that work. And so as we've grown, we've had the ability to expand the types of roles that we have at Komodo. And that resulted, one of the biggest things that we did last year was really put in place formalizing our internal mobility policies. And we've had over 10% of our roles year to date have been filled by internal candidates. And we see folks moving into new teams, sometimes even completely different functions, to learn something new about part of the company that they did not necessarily have exposure to for their own growth and development. So that's one, retention, and how do I give you a job that is exciting, that is helping you learn and grow and develop. From a kind of hybrid between culture and retention, we've also invested very heavily over the past 12 months in learning and development, providing opportunities for growth and development for our dragons. So we launched our LMS that has all sorts of custom bespoke learning content, integrates with LinkedIn Learning, got all sorts of like learning paths on leadership and our products and certain skills that they can develop. So kind of taking that lens of, I want to give you opportunities that may seem interesting, where you can find the development that works for you based on where you are in your career. And I think that leads to really high retention. And the last thing I would add there, I think I'd be remiss not to acknowledge folks are going to leave sometimes. Attrition is okay. People are sometimes really scared of attrition. And one of the best things, one of my favorite things, you see people leave a company and maybe they'll come back a year later, or they'll come back 6 months later, or maybe 2-3 years later. And they're like, hey, I went and I did this thing and I got some different experience and I want to come back. So how do you actually help people? Certainly want to retain everybody that we can, but if you really have an opportunity to go do something different or learn something new, how do we make sure that's a smooth transition for you and that we're supporting you in that too, so that we're building lifelong dragons that potentially can come back as workers again, as customers, as peers, as colleagues, as whatever. So that'd be the last piece.
Yeah, I feel like I'm hearing a lot more people talk about when folks are alumni of the organization too, and internal mobility, the career development, having the opportunity to learn new skills, shadow kind of what folks' career goals are really important too, in terms of the retention conversation when we're empowering folks to do their best work. I know something that we definitely wanted to discuss was that sense of belonging and diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. Every organization has different goals or pillars in mind. What are the pillars of the North Star of Komodo Health DEI goals?
North Stars of our DEI goals. So our DEI journey really began in earnest in mid 2020, like many other organizations as well. And we started that by looking at data. We are a data-driven organization. A lot of our software is predicated upon having really strong data. And so we kind of took the same approach we do in business internally, and we said, well, if this is something we believe, then we should actually use the data we have available to us to measure how we're doing. So from a North Star perspective, we evaluate DEI from a couple different lenses. One is representation, who's at the company, who are we attracting into Komodo, who interviews with us, who gets offers, like how does our representation across gender, across race and ethnicity, as we grow across other dimensions, looking at intersectionality, looking at sexual identity, et cetera. So we look at representation, we look at our processes, we actually evaluate how we're paying people, how we're promoting people. Do they have opportunity in the same way within Komodo? Once you get here, do you have equal experience? Do you have equal opportunity? So we measure that as well. We measure belonging. Do you feel like you have a voice? Can you be yourself? Do you feel like you are supported, however you identify, that you are able to show up, do your best work, and not have to hide who you are, and that your voice holds weight? So we look at that from a belonging perspective, which we measure in our engagement surveys. So we're really looking not only at, do we have a diverse population, but are we actually encouraging growth and development of a diverse population in ways that are unbiased, that are consistent, that are fair? Are we elevating voices that are often not elevated? Are we encouraging folks to seek perspective that is not theirs, to widen what they're exposed to and who they interact with? We did a lot of work around DEI over the past 2 years that has resulted in annual reports that we run. So we look at all of these metrics that I kind of just mentioned, and we evaluate them every year. We do big roundtables. So we actually encourage dialogue, encourage folks to ask questions about what they're reading, about what is their perspective? Does this resonate? What else should we be thinking about? We have affinity groups at Komodo. And I'm sure there's a whole bunch of stuff that I could share around that. And then we also have, from the recruiting side, how we actually partner with our affinity groups to ensure that we are getting in front of diverse talent, and we are positioning Komodo in a way that resonates.
It sounds like a really holistic way to think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, from representation to really ensuring that people have the tools, and you're listening to that qualitative data as well, the two-way conversation, to make sure that everyone has everything they need to bring their X selves to work. I want to talk about the affinity groups that you mentioned as well, of kind of what role do affinity groups play in Komodo's DEI strategy?
Yeah, so a big role in our DEI strategy. I think one of our fundamental beliefs when we really started all this work in earnest was that we didn't want to, appoint some DEI leader that has no power, no influence, and they have a lot of really wonderful ideas that don't actually get incorporated into practice. And so that was the thing that we actively tried to avoid. And one of the ways that we did that is the first time we started really looking at the data and we're like, oh, shoot, these problems are, we didn't know we had them, and what are we going to do about it? We brought employees into that conversation. And so we had all of our work streams were completely bottom up. They were completely dragon led. And some of those work streams actually evolved into affinity groups. So over the past couple of years, we took a handful of affinity groups. We built some toolkits. We kind of introduced, here's the concept. Here's how you think about a mission. Here's how you think about your goals and objectives. Our affinity groups have budget. They manage their budget. They can use their budget to bring it. We do a lot of speaker series. We do a lot of events. And so our affinity groups are really, I view them as great partners to me as a people leader. And I also view them as, as stakeholders of the programs and the initiatives that we are building at Komodo. Our experienced team within our people org partners with the leaders of our affinity groups and kind of a council that meets to ensure that, topics are shared across teams, that we have line of sight into what's going on. And that also gives us a way to continue to elevate their perspectives and elevate voices that may not always be like, the loudest person in the room, so that we can be conscious of how we can grow and scale our initiatives at Komodo. So the affinity groups have been just such a phenomenal success. We have 8 of them now, which is really 2 years, which is incredible. Really cool to see just the ingenuity and the creativity and the passion that folks have brought to completely like +1 activity. So on top of their day jobs, on top of all the stuff that they're delivering, they're bringing this passion to Komodo. And I think that's one of the most special pieces of our culture and kind of how we work together.
Yeah, being part of an affinity group or raising our hand to be a leader in an affinity group as well is another way you can really get involved and really participate in creating a great company culture too, and be seen, heard, and understood. And we know that it's everybody's responsibility, as you were walking through kind of the key pillars as well, of just how we can integrate equity, diversity, and inclusion into day-to-day processes for leaders. How do you really empower folks across the organization, no matter where they kind of sit or department, to practice that equity driven leadership, to see, okay, how can I continuously do better and iterate the process to make sure everybody is thought of?
Yeah, honestly, we're still kind of figuring this out. We do a lot of this bespoke. We do a lot of this through our people partners who work with leaders to say, how are you thinking about things? How is your team feeling? Looking at team performance, kind of optimization in that way. But how do we scale that? And so one of the ways that we've been tackling this in the past couple months has been embedding DEI centric content into all of our manager training materials. And so we have e-learning content, we have monthly roundtables that our team leads, which is really just an opportunity to come in and discuss and debate and workshop certain ideas. And so our L&D team has been embedding, or kind of working on embedding, well, how do we approach this with a DEI lens? Not that it's we're only talking about representation or bias today, but it's how could unconscious bias appear in how you run an effective meeting? How could your own perspective as a manager be seen differently from somebody who comes from a different background or comes from different experiences? So we're really trying to kind of weave those concepts together, because I think it's a lot more effective when DEI content is seen applicable in other situations, because it's not just, oh, this is a DEI conversation that we're having, but this is a people conversation, and our people are diverse, and we want to build a culture that is inclusive and that is equitable. And so I want to, part of our principle is really thinking about how we break down that silo of, oh, DEI conversations belong over here, and then there's everything else, because that's actually not how you make progress.
Absolutely requires everyone, and it can't be a siloed approach as well, and really using equity and diversity and inclusion as a lens for all of the different things that everybody is doing every day as an opportunity is really great too. I think over the past few years, we've really seen business as usual is out the window. It's so important to really think about auditing the employee experience, and there's been a lot of changes in the workforce overall. Can you tell me a little bit about how you've redesigned a system to be more equitable over the past 2 years, whether it's a process, policy, or initiative?
That's a great question. A lot of this so I think there's 2 things I'll highlight. One, on the employee experience side of things, we have an experience team that lead our offices, our cultural events. A lot of the things that I mentioned earlier in this call around we had a chess tournament, all kind of runs through our experience team. One change that we made that I think does have a very strong equity lens, and you're actually starting to see this in research now, the move to flexible and remote work provides a huge advantage to women, to people of color, to folks who don't live in major cities where there are tech hubs, so to speak, and getting access to really rewarding work. And so I think our ability to kind of navigate managing a hybrid work environment, giving our dragons the power to choose how and when to do their best work. And the fact that so many companies across the board are actually taking that approach as well makes me really happy, because I think it does a really good job of bringing equity to the workforce. Beyond the hybrid work piece, I think the other one that I would add, we've done a big overhaul of our performance processes at Komodo over the past various iterations over the past 18 months or so. And I think performance processes are an area where a lot of unconscious bias can exist. And so being really thoughtful about what kinds of questions you ask, what kinds of words are you using? How are we measuring manager efficacy? And we've changed some of the questions in our performance processes. We have very objective measures in how we think about pay. We have strong pay for performance culture at Komodo. We also have a very strong pay parity culture. And so really finding ways to recognize and reward outperformance while also ensuring that we are driving parity across the organization and not allowing bias to kind of creep into some of those decisions. The performance process improvements that we've made, I think, is another really noticeable way that we can address equity and parity. And we see that in the numbers. We just published our internal diversity and inclusion report. It's the first time that we've hit pay parity in all roles at all levels in aggregate across the company. And that's 2 years of effort. And it's slow and steady progress, but I think you make that progress when you put consistent attention and intention behind what you're doing. But you can move the needle. You actually can do it. I've seen it.
Yes, you can absolutely do it. And I think compensation, employee recognition, performance management, really looking at the kinds of feedback that you're giving, what does this actually mean as well, and making sure that everybody has a framework for success is really important. And I love those examples as well. I was at a conference earlier this year, and I was at a panel around inclusive workplaces, and really love this question. I've been trying to incorporate it in these conversations as well, because I think it's relevant. How is Komodo Health really thinking about not perpetuating trauma? There's a lot of trauma happening out in the external world, internally at the company.
That's a good question. All good questions, but this one like hits a personal chord for me. So at a high level, I think it's a big opportunity for our affinity groups to bring voice and to bond and to provide safe spaces for each other, especially when there are racially motivated violence, when there are situations that are especially hurtful or especially upsetting to groups of people. But one thing that we tried at Komodo recently that took me totally out of my comfort zone. I'm a very emotional person in general and like my personal life, but I'm very business. And when Roe versus Wade was overturned, I participate in our women's affinity group. I had a lot of conversations about what that meant, not only for women, but as a healthcare company focused on improving patient health and patient outcomes, what did this mean for us? And I got a lot of feedback from dragons across the company that they wanted to talk about it. And I was like, I don't really know that I want to talk about it. I want to talk about it with my friends, but I don't know that I want to talk about it at work. It's like the one thing, you don't talk about abortion, you don't talk about religion, you don't talk about politics. And we did it anyways. We opened a roundtable. We had over 250 people on a Zoom call, not webinar style, like everyone had a mic, everybody could participate. And it was one of the most beautiful, incredible, respectful, curious conversations that I've ever heard in a workplace. We had so many different perspectives from folks that were brought forward. We had women telling stories. We had everybody from every potential identification across the political spectrum who had stories to share, and everybody listened. And I think it was such a cathartic experience, and something that was really upsetting to a lot of people for many reasons, not only like folks who are upset that it was overturned, folks who are upset that it was not completely prohibited. And it was a very emotionally charged situation. And I think giving people an outlet to talk to each other, and a place to listen was so incredibly impactful. So we're taking the same approach with our diversity and inclusion report in a couple of weeks. It's really starting this kind of roundtable dialogue about stuff that makes us a little bit uncomfortable. And I think, 5 years ago would have been very taboo in a workplace that now really just isn't. It's really fascinating to watch, and it made me so uncomfortable to go into. And I'm like the biggest advocate of this now, because I really think it was such a special experience. And I think it's one way that you can give voice and give voice to people who are experiencing trauma, who are hurt, who are scared. That's kind of part of our responsibility.
Absolutely. I think that is a really great example of a really hard day and time where you cannot ignore the emotions people are bringing with them to work, and things that are happening that are related to the industry as well. So a really relevant conversation to really have folks share their experience and their feelings as well. There are a lot of conversations like this happening in terms of the changing kind of dynamic of conversations you have in the workplace, and also what employees are expecting from employers, and vice versa too. Is there a conversation that's happening now in the kind of more broader diversity, equity, and inclusion, or people, talent, culture space that you are really excited by, and why?
What am I really excited by? I think I'm actually really excited about I feel like the nature of work in general is kind of changing. You see a bit of a power dynamic shift across like company versus employee. But regardless of where your opinions lie there, I think it has encouraged us to be having conversations that we otherwise would absolutely not have had. And we would have said no, companies would have said, no, I'm not entertaining that conversation. And that's not what's happening anymore. You're seeing companies get into conversations with employees, whether that's like in the corporate sense or even in like leadership. You're having conversations that otherwise would not have happened. And I think that's really healthy. Like this concept of work-life balance, or work-life integration, whatever you want to call it. We spend so much of our time at work, and being able to have conversations about the things that matter, even if it's outside of the office, with people with whom you are working, is, I think, a very healthy and really awesome shift. And I'm really excited to see what the outcomes, because like there's a purpose of the conversations, right? You have the conversations in order to do something. And I think this will result in more interesting jobs, more flexibility, people finding better ways to express themselves through what they do, that is maybe not as clear cut or traditional as organizations have been historically. And that is really exciting to me.
It is really exciting, and I would agree with that as well. I'm excited to see what's going to happen over the next few years too, with these conversations, with the progression of us being kind of more open and leaning to empathy and vulnerability, especially in terms of leadership, and things like that as well. Kathleen, is there anything that I didn't directly ask that you want to share with folks who are listening, or underscore any key insights to top off our conversation today?
No, I think I'm all set. I really appreciate you coming out and doing these series. They're such important conversations to have. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from each other, even in listening to some of the kind of past blog series or podcast series. There's a lot that we can learn from each other as HR people, or people of people. And so really grateful for you for providing this opportunity for folks to share their perspectives.
I appreciate it. I
Thank
definitely
you.
enjoy the conversations with leaders like yourself, and I always learn something new in the conversations as well. So I'm happy to hear that feedback. Thank you so much for being a guest.
Absolutely. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. And as a reminder for folks who are listening, at AllVoices, we really believe in employees and employers being seen, heard, and understood, and know it's a requirement for the business to succeed overall. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.